let's talk about what's been happening in Sydney yesterday, Rita. We saw protests. We had talk about colonialism. We had talk about, how evil Israel is, all this sort of stuff. I'll be talking later in the show about my thoughts on the poison of moral equivalence and the lack of moral clarity in this entire debate. But let's just have a look at a couple of the shots from yesterday, these so-called protests.
God. And repeatedly during that protest, the links were made to Australia and the Indigenous community. So there's narrative of evil colonialist and imperialism and land being stolen. They were making the links with what's happened in Australia, and both arguments are utterly
Well, James, we saw one particularly nasty tweet, and we'll talk about this later as well, from the river to the sea, done in Indigenous colours. Did we have we got to look at that little tweet?
Activists put this up.
Look at this particular one. There was another one as well.
That's an
where the phrase "from the river to the sea,"
and we got to talk about
this. From the river to the sea, always was, always will be. So they've combined
here's a
poisonous, genocidal phrase about
not even clever enough to get it all in the frame.
And they've then linked that to Indigenous. That is disgusting, and I'll be talking later in the show about what that means.
I mean, this is the thing. First of all, what river? What sea? The Brisbane River, Sydney Harbour? What are they talking about?
The Yarra, obviously.
The Yarra, obviously, yes. But beyond that, though, this whole thing is so morally obtuse and offensive, what we have seen. These protests in cities yesterday. We're going to have one in Melbourne today, Rita, so look out for that. If you want the suffering in Palestine to end, you say, Hamas, release the hostages. You point out the fact that Gaza is not occupied. In 2005, Israel left Gaza, said, it's all yours. And in 2006, and ever since then, they have chosen to have.
It shouldn't have.
Of course, they shouldn't have. But now they've got a Hamas government. The way you end the suffering in Palestine, it is all entirely on Hamas. And they are the ones who are responsible, not Israel.
Why do we not ever see all the different chants? We get all the really quite offensive chants that amount to genocide, and river to the sea is essentially that. Why don't we ever hear any chants against Hamas? How about freeing Palestine and the Palestinian people from the evils of Hamas?
From Iran.
But we don't ever hear that. We don't hear anti-Iran or Iranian sentiment. We don't see protests outside the Iranian embassy or consulates having an issue with the country that's funding this terrorism.
Well, because what we're seeing is, this complete upsurge in anti-Semitism. It's just shocking. 2 weeks after 1,400 Israelis were killed, anti-Semitism has shot through the roof around the world, which is just shocking. But here's the other thing, too. We had these big protests here in Sydney yesterday, and interestingly enough, the New South Wales police didn't have to tell the Palestinian protesters not to go out because they might be set upon by angry Israeli supporters, which I think tells you something.
No one was arrested for carrying a Palestinian flag, I can tell you that, for their own safety, for not disturbing the peace. So we can see which group the police see as more volatile and likely to indulge in violence.
It's also utterly despicable that after the horrors, the inhuman depravity we saw 2 weeks ago, which still fills my mind with horror, and I'll be showing or talking about it a little bit later. But the reality is, to be protesting a political issue about Gaza is just obscene in the face of the depravity that we saw. And to use the tropes of from the river to the sea and all the rest of it is disgusting, and people should be utterly ashamed of themselves. We will talk more about it in a second, but I want just to talk briefly about the politics of this, particularly the left. The left, in my opinion, no friends of the Jews, haven't been for decades. And we're seeing that being played out now. For example, did Albo stop in Israel? He could have. No, he didn't. But I want to focus on, for example, James, we saw Michael Coates-Trotter, Tanya Plibersek's husband, putting out a tweet.
He sent out a message to
his staff.
Tell us about this. And he said, just how terrible it was what happened in Israel with Hamas and everything like that. And then he backtracked and he pulled it back and he said, "Oh no, we can't really."
That's obscene.
We don't want to inflame everything.
Utterly
and now we've got this. We've got Ed Husick, the industries minister, who has come out again this morning on this network and come out and played the de-escalate card. Which, of course, when you say de-escalate, what you're saying is Hamas has a right to go and murder Israelis with impunity and then not get what's coming to them.
I'm going to be talking a little bit about this notion of a proportionate response and how utterly absurd that is and what that actually means. I'll do that in the next segment. But we saw politicians, elected members of parliament at this protest yesterday in Sydney, and we'll see them again in Melbourne. I think Adam Bant is even speaking.
Adam Bant is speaking. We had Jenny Long from the New South Wales Greens there yesterday. The Greens Party is just absolutely...
And I really do hope, you mentioned that the Jewish people are horrified by what they're seeing, the way that the violence against them is being minimised, rationalised, even defended in some instances. And I'm hearing from Jewish people who lean left who are shocked by the extent of it.
Well, Rita, you know because you sat in one of them. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat and spoken at Jewish events and said that, in my opinion, the modern left is poison to Israel and the Jews, and had horrified responses because in the past many Jews did naturally lean to the left, and there were many reasons for that, understandably. But the modern left is a different beast, and the reality is it all boils down to the Americans under Obama and Biden cozying up to Iran, the most evil regime on the planet. And Iran, every rocket it sends up says death to Israel, death to America on it. They don't hide what their agenda is, and we are now seeing that being played out.
Rowan, hide the agenda. I mean, I grew up in Iran. We were forced to chant death to America, death to Israel at primary school. When you start school during the assembly, this is part of the routine. The indoctrination starts at that age, and yet the Iranian people, this is one of the crazy things we're seeing. So we're seeing in Western nations that should be standing firmly with Israel, their people, their universities, places of learning, they're all anti-Israel. We've got these mass rallies happening in the West from Sydney to London to New York. But in Iran, there was actually footage that's gone online in a soccer stadium where they tried to have a minute's silence for the Palestinian cause.
And they refused.
And the Iranian people made more noise than they've ever made in a soccer stadium.
Well, because the Iranians have...
Because they're sick of it. They are sick of funding the Sunni Islamist extremists of Hamas. They're sick of funding the Shia extremists of Hezbollah.
What the modern left has done under Biden and Obama. Iran should be destroyed. The Ayatollahs, that regime is pure evil. It needs to be destroyed.
We need moral clarity on this. It's
being propped up by Biden and Obama.
Of course it's being propped up. So, this all started under the Obama administration. As you quite correctly said, the problem that Joe Biden has now, he's created this complete monster. At the same time, he has destroyed American energy independence. He's allowed Iran to sell billions and billions of dollars of oil on the world market. This means now Iran has the whip hand over the U.S. economy. And as for Iranians chanting death to America, well, I mean, how is that different than what we see in the curriculums of some schools in the U.S. and Australia these days?
The only difference seems to be in Iran, it's the regime that's doing it, and the people are revolting against that. So it's shocking to me that people who have had this anti-American, anti-Israel indoctrination almost from birth, or at least for the last 40 years since the Islamic Revolution, they seem to be more sound and rational than our universities, both here in America, the UK.
Seriously, the coalition's got a lot of work to do when it wins the next election, which it must do, because the Albanese government is a joke. It's a disaster.